Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I want to talk about the latest news coming out of the United Kingdom, where Keir Starmer says the UK will not join Trump's blockade of Iran's ports. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I've come across an article here by the BBC. Starmer says UK will not join Trump's blockade of Iran's ports. This sounds like a more emboldened Keir Starmer and a more belligerent Keir Starmer belligerence in terms of the UK towards the United States. I'm going to go through this article briefly and let's have a look at what it says. The UK will not be involved in enforcing the US military blockade of Iran, Sir Keir Starmer has said. UK minesweepers and anti-drone capabilities will continue operating in the region, but British naval ships and soldiers will not be used to block Iranian ports. Speaking to BBC 5 Live, the Prime Minister said he was focused on getting the vital shipping channel of the Strait of Hormuz reopened in order to reduce energy prices as quickly as possible. Now, if you remember my previous videos, if you're a member of my channel, and I highly recommend you subscribe to the channel. We put out some fantastic content there. I did mention in a previous video that, the Europeans together with the British at the beginning of this war, rather than having come out and said, we're not involved in this war, we want to have nothing to do with this war, and I suspect that was because of the antagonistic relationship that they have with Donald Trump, primarily over Greenland and, the remarks that Donald Trump has made regarding Europe and how they need to walk back their policies enacted within the last 10 to 15 years and that Keir Starmer is no Churchill, things like that. It became more of an ego battle rather than a diplomatic, which was then turned into a diplomatic spat, rather than just one being based solely on facts. But nevertheless, when Europe and the UK came out saying that this is not their war, the reason for saying it, I believe, was flawed. What I believe should have happened was that Europe and the UK should have said to the Iranians as well as the Israelis and the Americans, this is not our war, we're not involved, we want to have nothing to do with it. Then they should have turned to the Iranians and said, listen, we are not getting involved on either side. That means we don't have any issues with you as well. But we want to make one thing emphatically clear. We have our energy supplies that come through the Strait of Hormuz. We have vital energy supplies that transit the strait. We will treat any interference of those energy supplies transiting the Strait of Hormuz, whether it be via attacks on our tankers, shutting the strait, or attacking the infrastructure of our allies in the Gulf region that produce that energy that is then passed on to us and our allies within Asia, it then will be viewed by us as a national security threat, and in the event of a national security threat, you would have twisted our hand and forced us to take a stance. And that stance would not bode well for you, because then you will have to deal not only with the Americans and the Israelis, but us, because you have dragged in unwilling parties into this war. And I believe that firm statement right there would have drawn a red line in the sand and would have made the Iranians sit back and take note. The fact that the initial statements were so feeble, Kaya Kallis saying there's no appetite, and it all sounding a little like a joke because it was more directed at Trump rather than the Iranians. The Iranians took the piss. They took the piss, and now you find that energy supplies, energy derivative product materials that travel through the strait onto Asia and Europe are now being affected. And you see it with the protests in Ireland. You can say that, a little more than what the United States receives is what Europe receives through the Strait of Hormuz. But the truth of the matter is Europe and the UK require the Strait of Hormuz for energy. And you see the scenario playing out in Ireland. And it's coming to a European city and town near you as well. So sit back and watch the fun. So this statement by Starmer now about, not joining and not blocking Iranian ports and, trying to keep the straits open. It didn't even need to get to this level had they been firm on their stance with Iran. I really maintain that had they been firm on their stance with Iran, this would have never got to this point between us and the Iranians. Whatever is happening between the Americans and the Israelis and the Iranians, that's their issue. But you're now in a position where the UK and Europe are paying extortion money to the Iranian IRGC to allow their energy shipments to go through. And that $2 million per tanker is going to be passed on to the consumer. So, the stupidity of this whole thing is absolutely astounding. Nevertheless, the article continues. The US announced its blockade after talks with Iran failed to secure a lasting peace deal to end hostilities in the Middle East. Following a meeting between the US and Iran negotiators in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, President Donald Trump said the US would start blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. The US Central Command CENTCOM later confirmed its forces would enforce the blockade impartially on vessels leaving and entering Iranian ports, including those located in the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. CENTCOM added that US forces would not impede the freedom of vessels transiting to and from non-Iranian ports, and that additional information would be provided to commercial mariners via a formal notice before the blockade starts. Keir, who has recently returned from a visit to the Gulf region, said he had been working with allies to keep the strait open, not shut. Now, again, Keir Starmer's called for that 40-nation, dialogue to try and keep the strait open. He's then flown on to the Gulf nations. That looked like a disaster. I don't understand. This last-minute scramble could have all been averted. Now, wanting to recall a 40-nation, dialogue again to try and keep the straits open. The point is, the Americans are now forcing the hand of the Europeans. And by the Americans controlling the port on either end, they've now basically thrown the ball back into the Iranian court. It's now up to the Iranians as to how it's going to play this hand. The reason is because ships exiting the Strait of Hormuz carrying Iranian oil that is going to leave for destinations outside the Gulf region means that the Americans are now going to be monitoring that. The Americans will be in control of what leaves Iran. That means that they will have a tighter grip on the economy, and this is now hemming the regime in because it's going to create more strife on the people as a result of an economy that is almost shut down. Look at what happened in Cuba. They cut off the tap from Venezuela and everything descended exponentially. You're going to see a similar situation. But what happens in this instance on the part of the Iranians is that they then become dangerously threatened, because now they have to go and either capitulate or fight. And I suspect the Iranians are going to fight. They're going to fight, and it's going to be a serious few weeks before something does change. I've seen reports coming out that Pezeshkian has urged the Americans to revisit their stance because the Iranians are prepared to, look at a more watered down version of the American request. I don't think that's going to be possible. The Israelis are not going to allow it, and Pezeshkian has no authority in this matter. He's just a figurehead for diplomatic means. The IRGC, the Basij, these are the hardliners that are controlling the regime. It's quite a long article. I urge you to have a look at it. But essentially what it is all about is that, Keir Starmer is now scrambling around. He probably sees this as an opportunity to define himself as some global statesman. Unfortunately, I think he's barking up the wrong tree. I think he would have got a lot more of a favorable response and a lot more respect in the world had he taken a firm stance on not being involved in the war, but at the same time laying down the red line for the Iranians in terms of energy security for the UK, Europe, and its allies. So we're keeping a close eye on this. We're going to keep you updated as things go along, and I urge you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel if you're interested in geopolitics, and it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow. So we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.